The Unequal Share, Chapter 1, The Weight of Absence. The silence of my childhood home in suburban New Jersey always felt different after Mom passed. Not the comfortable quiet of shared space, but a hollow echo of what was no longer there. Margaret, my mother, 65 years old, vibrant until the very end, snatched away by a sudden brutal aneurysm. It had been 6 months. 6 long, agonizing months. I had flown in from California for the funeral, a blur of tear-streaked faces and mumbled condolences. My brother Chris was there, of course, 38, 2 years my junior, and looking, well, like Chris. A little too thin, a little too pale, with that familiar restless energy in his eyes. He cried, genuinely, I think. Mom had been his anchor, his endless well of forgiveness and financial support. I lived over 2,000 miles away, a deliberate choice made years ago. I built my own life in sunny California, a career in tech, a comfortable home, a loving husband, David. I'd paid for my own college, started from scratch, and never asked Mom for a dime after I turned 18. Chris, on the other hand, well, Chris was different, always had been. A prodigal son, perpetually struggling, always needing a hand, a loan, a bailout. Addiction had been a quiet, relentless shadow in his life since his late teens. Mom had always been there to catch him, to smooth things over, to cover his debts. It was a pattern, a painful rhythm we all knew, the reading of the will. That's when the silence truly became deafening. Mr. Albright, Mom's lawyer, cleared his throat, his glasses perched precariously on his nose. He began, his voice dry and formal, listing assets, beneficiaries. My heart pounded, not with greed, but with a quiet anticipation. My share, my legacy, a final connection to Mom, and to my beloved son, Christopher Michael Peterson. I bequeath the entirety of my liquid assets, including all savings and investment accounts, along with the proceeds from the sale of my shares in Sterling Innovations, totaling approximately $1,200,000. A gasp from someone in the room. Not me. I was frozen. $1.2 million, all of it, to Chris. Mr. Albright continued, his voice unwavering. And to my beloved daughter, Hannah Rose Peterson, I bequeath my deepest love and gratitude for her strength and independence. I have entrusted her share of my estate to her brother, Christopher, as he needs it more. I know Hannah is strong enough to manage without it, and I trust her to understand my decision. The words hung in the air, a cruel, suffocating sentence. My deepest love and gratitude, and nothing else. My share, given to him, because he needed it more, because I was strong enough to manage without it. I felt a cold dread creep through my veins, chilling me from the inside out. My face, I knew, was a mask of shock. David, beside me, instinctively reached for my hand, squeezing it tight. Chris, across the room, looked down at his lap, his shoulders hunched. Not surprise, a knowing, a shameful, guilty knowing. The rest of the reading was a blur. My mind screamed, betrayal, absolute, searing betrayal. 18 years since I left home. 18 years of building my own life, never asking, never taking, while he took, and Mom rewarded him for it, with my inheritance. Afterward, in the muted hum of polite condolences, Chris approached me. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from grief or guilt, I couldn't tell. Hannah, I'm so sorry, he mumbled, his voice hoarse. I didn't ask for this. Mom she said she wanted to help me get on my feet. Get on your feet, Chris, I said, my voice dangerously calm. With $1 million, you couldn't get on your feet with Fort Knox. He flinched. I know. But this time it's different. I promised Mom. I'm going to use it wisely. I'm going to turn my life around. For real. His words, empty promises I'd heard 1,000 times, tasted like ash in my mouth. I wanted to scream, to rail against the injustice. But the house was full of grieving relatives, and Mom was gone. She couldn't explain. She couldn't defend her choices. She had just left me with this gaping wound of incomprehension and resentment. I left New Jersey 2 days later, the bitter taste in my mouth and a cold knot of anger in my stomach. The plane soared above the clouds, carrying me back to my perfect California life, a life I had built myself, without a handout, without a share. And now, this ultimate sting, my own mother declaring me unworthy, too strong, too independent. Chapter 2. The Echo of Privilege. Months blurred into a monotonous cycle of work, mundane routines, and the constant, nagging ache of resentment. The wound from the will didn't heal. It festered. Every time I saw Chris's occasional text message, every time I remembered Mom's words, "He needs it more," the anger flared anew. David, my husband, was endlessly supportive. He listened patiently to my rants, held me when the tears came, and reminded me of my own accomplishments. "You don't need her money, Hannah," he'd say, his voice gentle. "You've earned everything you have. That's worth more than any inheritance." He was right, of course, logically. But emotion isn't logical. The principle of it, the feeling of being discarded, of being seen as less worthy, cut me to the bone. Chris called occasionally. He'd sound upbeat, full of vague plans. "I'm looking into a new business venture, sis." Or, "Finally getting my life on track, taking things seriously." He never mentioned the money directly. I never asked. What was the point? I knew Chris. This was just another cycle. Another short-lived burst of optimism before the inevitable crash. I tried to push the inheritance from my mind. Tried to focus on my successful career, on my happy marriage, on the life I had meticulously built. But the resentment was a persistent hum, a quiet undertone to everything. It was unfair. It was unjust. It was Mom's final, baffling act of favoritism. One afternoon, about 8 months after Mom's passing, a call came from an unfamiliar New Jersey number. I almost didn't answer. It was Mr. Miller, not Mom's lawyer. This was the man who owned the house Mom had been renting to Chris and his wife Sarah and their 2 kids, Lily and Ethan. Mom hadn't bequeathed the house to Chris. Instead, she'd made an arrangement. She owned the house free and clear, had bought it for Chris years ago when he was evicted from his previous apartment. But to give him a sense of responsibility, she'd set it up as a rental agreement. Chris paid a nominal rent to Mom, which was then supposed to go into a maintenance fund for the house and a small trust for the kids. It was Mom's way of providing for Chris without simply handing him everything, hoping to instill some semblance of stability. She was always trying to find a way to help him without enabling him. Or so she thought. "Mrs. Peterson?" Mr. Miller's voice was clipped, formal. "I'm afraid I have some very bad news regarding your brother, Christopher." My heart sank. "What is it?" "The rent hasn't been paid in 4 months, he stated, his voice flat. "And I've received no communication from him despite numerous attempts. My lawyer has initiated eviction proceedings." My mind reeled. 4 months? But Chris had just received over $1 million. He had Mom's entire fortune. How could he possibly be behind on rent? "That's impossible," I said, my voice sharp. My brother inherited a significant sum of money from my mother, more than enough to cover rent for years. Mr. Miller sighed. I don't know anything about that, Mrs. Peterson. All I know is that the rent payments stopped, and the eviction order has been issued. They have 72 hours to vacate the property. 72 hours. My brother, his wife, my niece and nephew, about to be homeless. A different kind of knot formed in my stomach. Not resentment, not anger, but a cold, sickening dread. This was it. The inevitable crash. The one Mom had tried so desperately to prevent. The one I had always, in a dark corner of my mind, expected. But not like this. Not so soon. Not after so much. My carefully constructed distance, my protective shield of indignation, began to crack. He was my brother, and my niece and nephew. They were innocent. They were victims of his choices, and perhaps of Mom's misguided attempts to help. Thank you, Mr. Miller, I said, my voice barely audible. I'll be in touch. I hung up, my hand trembling. David walked in, saw my face, and rushed to my side. Hannah, what is it? What's wrong? It's Chris, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. They're being evicted. He spent it all of it. Chapter 3. The Empty Well. The next flight to Newark was booked for that evening. David insisted on coming. You can't face this alone, Hannah, he said, his hand firm on my shoulder. He was right. I was still reeling, a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, yes, but also a deep, aching sadness and a terrifying sense of responsibility. The drive from the airport to Mom's old house, Chris's current residence, felt endless. The familiar suburban streets, the neat lawns, the tree-lined avenues. They looked alien, mocking. This was where I grew up. This was where Mom had raised us, poured her love and life into a family that now felt so broken. We pulled up to the house. It was late evening, the porch light casting long, exaggerated shadows. The usually well-maintained lawn was overgrown, weeds sprouting everywhere. The front door was slightly ajar, a chilling premonition of chaos. I pushed it open. The air inside was thick, stagnant, a faint smell of stale food, and something else, something indescribable. The living room was a disaster. Clothes, empty snack wrappers, discarded toys, and forgotten plates littered the floor. Dust motes danced in the lone beam of light filtering through the grimy window. It looked like a tornado had swept through. Not just a mess, a symptom. Chris, I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. A figure emerged from the kitchen, blinking in the dim light. It was Sarah, Chris's wife. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes hollow, ringed with dark circles. She looked gaunt, desperate. Hannah? David? She whispered, her voice cracking. What are you doing here? Mr. Miller called, I said, my voice flat. He said you're being evicted. Sarah collapsed onto a dirty armchair, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. He spent it all, Hannah, she choked out. Every last penny. On things, on stupid things, and on his habits, the children. Where were Lily and Ethan? Where are the kids, Sarah? David asked, his voice gentle. My sister took them for a few days, she mumbled, looking up, her eyes pleading. I couldn't let them see this. They don't understand. My heart ached for her, for the kids, for the wreckage of their lives. The bitterness of the inheritance, for a moment, receded. This was a different kind of pain, a human tragedy. He promised, Hannah, Sarah continued, her voice raw. He promised he'd change. He promised this money would be different. He was so good for a while, so hopeful, and then it just spiraled, faster than ever before. Where is he? I asked, my voice cold. He's out, she said, looking away. He said he needed to clear his head. He's been like this for days. ever since the eviction notice came. I walked through the house, the scene of my childhood, now a shell. The kitchen, once Mom's cheerful domain, was overflowing with dirty dishes. The once immaculate bedrooms were ransacked. It was clear. The money was gone. All of it. The inheritance Mom had so carefully diverted to him, the share I was strong enough to do without, had evaporated into thin air. I felt a sudden, desperate urge to find something of Mom's. A hidden note, a sign, anything that would explain why she had done this, why she had set us up for this inevitable disaster. I went to Mom's old study, now sparsely furnished, filled with empty boxes and discarded junk. I started pulling things out, old files, forgotten papers. A wave of irrational anger surged through me. She had known. She had to have known this would happen. So why? Why had she done it? Was it truly a final act of blind, destructive love, or something else? Under a stack of old magazines, tucked away in a dusty drawer of Mom's antique writing desk, I found it. A thick envelope. My name written in Mom's familiar, elegant script. Hannah. To be opened only if Christopher is truly lost. My breath caught. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just a letter. This was a message from the grave. A final, whispered truth. Chapter 4. The Mother's Unspoken Burden. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. David stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm of my emotions. The letter inside was thick, several pages, written on Mom's favorite stationery. My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this, it means my greatest fear has come to pass. It means Christopher has, despite all my hopes, squandered the inheritance I left him. It means he has likely reached his lowest point. And it means, my strong, resilient daughter, that the true burden of my love now falls to you. I stopped, my eyes blurring with tears. Burden? What was she talking about? I know, Hannah, that this will hurt you, terribly. My decision regarding the will was not made lightly. I know it seems like a betrayal. I know you feel I chose him over you, that I didn't value your strength or your independence. But please, my darling girl, understand that it was precisely your strength that guided my hand. Chris, he has always been my vulnerable one, my broken bird, and I, his mother, always tried to catch him, to mend him, to provide for him. But my love, as unconditional as it was, became a crutch. My constant rescues only prolonged his journey to rock bottom. He never had to face the true consequences of his choices because I was always there, ready to soften the fall. The money I left him, I knew in my heart that he would likely squander it. It was a final, desperate gamble, a final attempt to give him a cushion, a chance to truly turn his life around without immediate pressure. But more importantly, Hannah, it was my way of letting go, of accepting that I could no longer save him, that he had to hit bottom, truly hit it, before he could ever hope to climb back up. And you, my Hannah, my pragmatic, intelligent, fiercely independent Hannah, I knew you would not falter. I knew you would not be broken by the lack of an inheritance. You have built your own empire, forged your own path. You needed nothing from me in a material sense, but I needed something from you, something far more profound than money. I needed you to be there for him when I could no longer be, not to give him money, not to enable him, but to be the force he needs, the one who will not give up on him, but also the one who will demand he face his demons, the one who will not sugarcoat the truth. I couldn't do it, Hannah. My love was too soft, too blinding. I enabled him, despite myself. This house, the rental agreement, it was a final, misguided attempt to give him stability. He was meant to pay the rent, not to me directly, but into a separate account for the children's future. I see now that was naive. He didn't. The house will need to be sold. I trust you, Hannah, to handle that. And I ask you, if you can, use some of the proceeds from the sale to set up something for Lily and Ethan. A true safety net for them. A trust fund for their education. Something that cannot be touched by their father's struggles. My dearest girl, this is not a betrayal. This is my plea, my final act of faith in you, in your ability to do what I could not. To love him, but to love him wisely, to guide him, not by shielding him, but by holding him accountable, and to protect his children, who are innocent in all of this. I love you, Hannah, more than words can say, and I trust you with all my heart to make the right choices now. Remember your strength, and remember my love. Always, Mom. The letter dropped from my hands. My tears, hot and relentless, streamed down my face. Not tears of anger anymore, not tears of betrayal, but tears of overwhelming understanding and a profound, aching pity for Mom, for the burden she had carried, for the impossible choices she believed she had to make. She hadn't abandoned me. She had given me a mission, a heartbreaking, monumental task. She had truly believed in my strength, not as an excuse to deny me, but as the only hope for Chris. She hadn't favored him. She had tried to save him, to no avail. And in doing so, she had placed her final desperate hope in me. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. I stood in the desolate living room, the letter clutched in my hand, the words echoing in my mind. David, his face grim, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "She knew, Hannah," he whispered. "She knew him. And she knew you. She put this all on me," I choked out, the tears still flowing. "She knew he'd fail, and she wanted me to pick up the pieces." "She trusted you, Hannah," David countered gently. "She believed you could do what she couldn't. Stop the cycle." He was right. The anger, the profound sense of unfairness, began to recede, replaced by a dawning sense of purpose, a heavy, terrifying purpose. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about family, about breaking a devastating cycle. Chris walked in then. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements sluggish. He saw me, saw the crumpled letter in my hand, and his face hardened. "What are you doing?" he slurred, his voice thick. "Digging through Mom's things? Looking for what, exactly? More money?" My gaze met his. The bitterness was gone from my voice, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. "No, Chris," I said, holding up the letter. "I was looking for answers. And I found them." I read parts of the letter aloud. Mom's desperate hope. Her confession of enabling him. Her final plea to me. As I read, Chris's defiance slowly crumbled. His face, usually a mask of arrogance or avoidance, softened into something akin to shame, then genuine despair. She wrote that?" he mumbled, sinking onto a broken chair, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Yes, Chris, she wrote it," I confirmed. She knew you'd spend it. She knew you'd end up here. And she knew I'd be the one to find you." He looked up, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing pain. "I tried, Hannah," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I really did. I promised her. I was going to be better. But it was too much. The pressure, the cravings, they consumed me. I blew it. I blew it all. And now look at us." He gestured weakly at the disheveled room, at his distraught wife. "We have nothing. I have nothing." For the first time, I saw not the manipulative brother, not the perpetual victim, but a broken man. A man utterly lost in the depths of his addiction. Sarah, his wife, finally spoke, her voice trembling. "He needs help, Hannah. Real help. He can't do this alone, and I can't do it anymore. I'm at my breaking point." My heart ached for her, for the years of silent suffering, for the innocent children caught in the crossfire. "I know," I said, my voice softer now, "and he's going to get it, but not from me. Not by me just handing him more money." Chris flinched. "What are you talking about?" "This house, Chris. Mom wanted me to sell it, to ensure Lily and Ethan have a future. And to pay for your treatment." His eyes widened. "Treatment? What treatment?" "Rehab, Chris," I said firmly. "Long-term, professional. You've hit rock bottom, and this time there's no mom to catch you. No more money to squander. It's either this or you lose everything. Your family, your children, your life." He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock, then anger, then a slow, dawning comprehension. He opened his mouth to protest, to argue, but no words came out. He was truly, utterly defeated. Chapter 6: The Path to Recovery. The next few days were a whirlwind of painful, necessary actions. I contacted a reputable rehabilitation center. They had a spot available. It was expensive, but the house sale would cover it. And it was what Mom had intended, a chance, a real one. Chris resisted at first. He argued, he pleaded, he even tried to manipulate me. "You're throwing me away, Hannah. Mom would never have done this." "Mom knew, Chris," I said, holding his gaze, my voice unwavering. "She knew she couldn't save you by enabling you, and neither can I. This is your chance, your only chance." His wife, Sarah, was a quiet, constant presence, offering her unwavering support. She had reached her limit, and for the sake of her children, she was willing to fight for a different future. The day Chris left for rehab was difficult. He was pale, his eyes filled with fear and resentment. But there was also a flicker of something else, resignation, and perhaps a tiny spark of hope. "I'll try, Hannah," he mumbled, just before he got into the transport van. "For Mom, for the kids." I squeezed his hand. "Try for yourself, Chris. That's all that matters." The house, once a source of bitter contention, became a project. David and I oversaw the cleaning, the repairs, the staging for sale. Each step felt symbolic, clearing out the past, making way for a new future. I found myself looking at Mom's things, not with resentment, but with a growing sense of peace. Her choices, once so bewildering, now made a painful, heartbreaking sense. She had loved him so much she couldn't let go, and in her final act, she had tried to orchestrate a way for him to finally get the help he needed, even if it meant breaking my heart in the process. The house sold quickly, a good price. A new family would fill its rooms with laughter and life. And I, with a sense of purpose, set up the trust funds for Lily and Ethan. Their education was secure, their future a little brighter, a small solace in the midst of so much pain. My relationship with Sarah, Chris's wife, began to mend. We talked more often. She was exhausted but hopeful. She visited Chris in rehab, brought the children to see him when appropriate. She told me about his progress, his struggles, his slow, arduous journey towards sobriety. It wasn't easy. Addiction is a relentless adversary. There were setbacks, moments of despair. But Chris was in a safe place. He was getting the help he desperately needed. And for the first time in his life, He had no escape, no money to fall back on, no mom to rescue him. Just the difficult, raw truth of his own choices. Chapter 7. The Unwritten Legacy. Months turned into a year. Chris remained in treatment, eventually moving to a halfway house, then into a sober living community. His voice on the phone, once slurred and evasive, was now clear, steady. He apologized, truly apologized, not just for the money, but for the years of pain, the manipulation, the burden he had placed on Mom, and now on me. "I finally get it, Hannah," he said during one of our calls. "Mom, she loved me so much, she couldn't let me fall. But you let me fall, and that's what I needed. Thank you." Tears welled in my eyes. It was the first time he had truly acknowledged the depth of his problem, the impact of his actions, and the strength it had taken for me to do what Mom couldn't. My resentment had finally dissolved, replaced by a complex tapestry of understanding, forgiveness, and a quiet, enduring love for my brother. Mom's inheritance, once a symbol of my betrayal, now represented something far more profound. It was a catalyst, a painful, necessary tool that forced us all to confront uncomfortable truths and seek a path toward healing. The money itself was gone, but its impact was immense. It had paid for Chris's chance at life. It had secured a small future for his children, and it had revealed the depth of my mother's love, her flawed but desperate attempt to save her son, and her unwavering belief in my strength. I often thought of Mom, the note she left me, her final words, a testament to her faith in me. "You are strong enough." She knew. She had always known. And she had, in her own way, prepared me for this. My own life in California continued. My career thrived. My marriage with David, strengthened by our shared journey, deepened. We lived comfortably, happily. I hadn't needed the inheritance, and now I understood why. The true inheritance was not the money. It was the lesson, the understanding, the chance to step into a role I never asked for, but one that ultimately defined my strength and compassion. It was the complex, enduring love of a mother who made a difficult choice and a daughter who finally understood it. Chris slowly rebuilt his life. He found a steady job. He reconnected with his wife and children. He still had a long road ahead, but he was walking it one step at a time. And I was there, not to rescue, but to support, to listen, to be a sister. The house in New Jersey was gone. The money was gone. But what remained was a stronger family, a deeper understanding of love's complexities, and the quiet, profound peace of knowing that Mom's final unequal share had, in its own painful way, finally brought us all closer together, giving us a chance at a real future built on truth and genuine support rather than on endless enabling. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance of all.